Hi, and welcome to this Wednesday's 6 p.m. talk. And today we will be talking about a very interesting topic with my friend and colleague, Dr. Naif Al Mutawa, clinical psychologist. He has a lot of many years of experience. We work together also at his center in Kuwait, the Sewer Center, and he'll be telling us a little bit more about himself. Today we'll be talking about how to set oneself free from our ego. So we'll be talking about the ego in that, how it impacts our life. So I'm just going to add Dr. Naif right now.
Hey, Jeremy.
Hi, Naif.
How are you? Long time.
Very long time, yes, indeed. So nice to connect with you here.
It's fantastic. It's 6 p.m. where you are and 6 a.m. where I am, so we span the globe here.
Yes, exactly. All right. And so let's just deep dive into the subject of today. So thank you very much for joining into the conversation, which basically every Wednesday or so, at least in the last few weeks, I've put a hold on the talks. But yeah, so the objective is basically to talk about different topics related to the field of psychology and sharing ideas, something that can be interesting to our audience and viewers, listeners, to basically break the stigma and make this more of a casual thing.
Fantastic.
So perhaps we can talk. I mean, today's talk is about the ego and how it affects our life. Perhaps we can talk a little bit about how that works. Maybe we can talk a little bit about maybe the history and why we have an ego to start with, and if it's important to have an ego, and if it's just a natural part of us to have an ego, and I guess more importantly is how that ego impacts our life as we go through our life, and then we can talk about other things as well.
Sure. So the ego, as I understand it, is something that's been part of, the thinking of how the human mind works for thousands of years. I mean, Freud, finally penned the word ego, but actually it's been there in the Jewish Kabbalah, it's there in Sufi mysticism. The Sufis refer to it as the ana, the me, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
and it's actually quite interesting. There's a lot of writing about psychoanalysis and Sufism, and a lot of the constructs. The 7 years, and having somebody who's already gone through psychoanalysis to psychoanalyze you, and a lot of parallels. Regression, which is very much used by the Sufis. But the
Mm-hmm.
interesting, so for me, the understanding of the ego is the compromise between the superego and the id. What that means is this: so we all have that part of us that says, "Don't do it, don't do it," haram, aib, all this stuff. And then there's part of it that says, "Do it, do it, do it." Just like Nike, just go out, do it.
Yes.
Uh,
Exactly.
and the ego is basically where it compromises. So to have a healthy ego, you kind of have a balance and you understand, you know, to be able to separate between what you want and what you can achieve and how it can help or hurt you if you achieve it. So you're able to kind of balance that. But
Mm.
where egos kind of go, I don't want to say wrong, but go kind of in a way that's unhelpful to the person, is when the ego is thinking about right and wrong
Mm-hmm.
versus is that actually going to help me or hurt me? And that's a
Yes.
very clear distinction.
Yeah. So that really comes under for example, when we start to compare ourselves with other people, or in the sense that maybe this is not good enough, or I begin to set myself with unrealistic goals, for example.
Yes,
That could be a harmful way that the ego kind of affects us.
absolutely. And it's very important to understand the difference between wanting something, and it's okay to want whatever you want, but also
Mm.
the expectancy that it has to happen. Here's where we kind
Yes.
of lost. Here's where anger comes out of. Here's where depression comes out of. Here's where anxiety comes out of. This kind of not being able to separate between wants and desires. Like, for example, I need to be loved. No, you don't need to be loved. You want to be loved, right?
Mm.
Because if you don't get loved, you'll survive. You need water. Without water, you die. You need food. Without food, you'll die. You don't need it unless you're a child. So being able to kind of separate those constructs out and knowing kind of what's helpful for me to think about in a certain way and what's hurtful.
Yes, yes, exactly. I mean, when we grow up in terms of perhaps another aspect of ego. With ego, we could ego be defined as one's sense of self, one's identity, one's basically us as separate from another or other people.
Yes, and actually, there's there's a lot of research on ego differentiation, being able to kind of see yourself as a separate individual versus somebody that's part of codependency, where you're kind of fused into somebody, or
Mm-hmm.
you have people who have more personality disorders, like people who are narcissists, to see you
Yes.
as an extension of themselves, right? That's not a
Yes.
person.
Yes.
That's a tool that I'm going to use to get what I want for me, right?
Yes.
So, and
Yes.
their kind of ego, kind of the boundaries become blurry, and kind of people use their ego to fuse and diffuse. And people are borderline, right? They fuse and they diffuse, all the time.
Of course, of course. So there's kind of like a splitting happening. At least the word splitting is like there's a splitting of the ego. So the person is it's unconscious. Obviously, they're not aware of what actually is happening, but it's the kind of a driver where they have a feeling to it's a need to be recognized, a need to be recognized because perhaps they were not recognized enough when they were growing up, right?
But,
That could be.
but it's interesting you say need. That's the problem, because when it's seen
Hmm.
as need,
Hmm.
and thus the neediness component of it, right,
Yes,
versus the
yes.
want, right? We all
Versus
want,
the want.
and this it's
Yes, correct, correct. We all want attention because it's part of being human,
yeah.
right? We all seek that recognition, that importance. But as you said, the moment it becomes like a need, that's when actually it turns into a problem.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
yeah, of course.
and when when you're in the throes of a relationship with somebody, whether it's a friendship or romantic relationship with somebody who has these kind of blurred boundary ego issues, it
Mm.
can it can be, when you're in the midst of it, it can be quite the "what's wrong with me" kind of thing. But when you're out,
Yes,
you're like, what was wrong with them? It becomes,
yes,
and that's where healing happens, where you're kind of able to differentiate, kind of, okay, here's the boundary, and clearly it wasn't respected, not because the other person wanted to hurt me, but because that's how they learned how to relate. So they obviously had attachment issues, or there was an insecure attachment, or so
yes,
it all feeds back to the self. Yeah.
yes, yes, of course. And it's a process of work. Of course, there's the like we talk about, maybe the healthy side of ego is knowing that, okay, I have my identity, I don't need something. It's like I choose or I want something, and I guess that's okay. All right, that's totally okay, because there's a lot of people who will say, for example, who will talk about, the ego is not a good thing in the absolute, right? It's like it become like a general thing. Like the ego is not a good thing, and you need to detach yourself from the ego because it kind of ruins your life. What do you think about that? I
I,
mean, yeah.
I think it's important to know who you are, to know what your limits are, to know where you can excel and not excel, and to put your and to understand that you're limited like everybody else, and to kind of be able to kind of grow and succeed while helping others succeed, versus which is the whole thing with the jealousy versus envy kind of thing. The envious ego, kind of, because they feel inadequate, they don't want you to have what you have, right?
Yes.
Whereas with the differentiation, that is that kind of someone being jealous, which is more healthy. Like, you have something, I want it too, so I'm going to work hard to get to, and maybe you can help me get there, and I can help. So it's more of a transactional kind of going forward relationship, versus let me drag everybody down because I can't be up relationship. Yeah.
Yes, it's again, totally. It's more of a, if it can be balanced and harnessed in a constructive way, and therefore we can grow, and be fulfilled, as a human, in the
And
end.
there's also an element of kind of, there's nothing wrong with having an ego. Now I'm talking about ego as in kind of popular culture ego, not ego as in psychodynamic ego. So ego as in, like, I'm great kind of thing, right?
Yes.
There's, even if you have this sense of ego, it's very important to know how to harness it and how to talk about yourself. So I'll give you an example. So a lot of times, when I give my talks publicly, I follow what's called the hero's journey, right? In the hero's
Hmm.
journey, there's 12 steps. Joseph Campbell wrote thousands of pages about it.
Yes.
People hear stories in a particular way. They don't like to hear about, look at me, how great I am. They want to hear about, hey, I started, people fought me, I failed, I stood up, I failed again, and in the end, I learned something. But I also, it also hurt me to get there, right? People
Yeah.
want to hear the story in that way. People don't want to hear about how great you are, right?
Yes. Yes.
So it's also
Absolutely.
so it's okay to have this sense of self. That's to have it to be inflated is not good. For it to be healthy in terms of, I see myself in a positive way, is fantastic. But even that, the way you communicate it has to be tempered, based, because not everybody, here's something I learned at 50. Not everybody wants you to succeed. Right?
Yeah.
There are people out there who really don't want you to succeed, right? So you have to be very
Yes.
clear of how to tell your story in a way to get what
Yes.
you want, but not step
Yes.
on. So, and that it takes a lot of kind of negotiating.
Yes. Yes. Being really true to yourself, be authentic to yourself, is being comfortable with yourself.
Yeah.
I think that's really important. That's key. A lot of people are not comfortable with themselves, and there's a lot of insecurities, and they don't know. So they have this, again, it's like they're looking for that feedback and that comparison to other people. And it becomes, you know, I'm not going to say wasted energy, but it's obviously an energy that's very draining,
Yeah.
you know, on someone, because they're putting all their effort externally instead of focusing on themselves internally.
Yeah.
On that, but in its essence, as humans, we have the ego. The ego is there, so it's about learning how to live with it, as opposed to kind of distancing yourself from it. Really, that's really an important thing,
And being told, and then it goes back to cultural constructs, right? So
Yes.
in some cultures, it's okay to kind of, you know, have an ego. In some cultures, it's not, right?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
So it also becomes about kind of navigating cultural nuances, not fusing yourself necessarily into the group, but understanding that this is a group-based culture, and you know, if I step outside the bounds, I will get punished, and it's okay if I want to fight the fight, you know, just don't accept that the win will be a personal win. It won't be a group win, and if you're okay with that, then you're okay with that. But also that comes, you know, it comes with baggage. It comes with consequences, right? So if you step outside the parameters of what is supposed to be, then, you know, you can be a trendsetter. You might be able to change the way things are in that culture, but it probably won't happen in your lifetime. So you know, so you have to kind of really, you know, accept that you're paying a tax, and you know, and in advance, kind of, you know, going into your own self and say, you know, can I afford this tax or not? Because if I can't, then it's going to be, you know, this issue for the rest of my life, where it's going to just kind of, you know, taint me, you know. And if I don't have the ego to be able to withstand the criticism, then I've dug myself into a hole. But if you can't, but just because you can doesn't mean that you should either, right?
Yes. Yes. So it's an opportunity. Of course, it's there to learn more about yourself, to grow, and to grow through your experiences and through your challenges. Sometimes it is hard to do by oneself. And obviously that's why you have therapists, you have coaches, you know, you have different modalities nowadays for people to learn to get to know themselves and to untangle themselves from these concepts that a lot of people don't know about, obviously, right? And then to work through these aspects. So essentially, perhaps freeing oneself from one's ego is not like completely, you know, disentangling yourself from it, because that's all. It's part of you. So it's not about freeing yourself. That means it's never going to be part of you. It's exactly just about creating that balance and that ability not to allow yourself to be flooded by these ideas that you might have, that might be distorted ideas, unrealistic ideas. You know?
Accepting, you know, you're not going to be happy about everything. You know, the world is here to make you feel good about yourself. It's okay to have days. It's okay to have bad relationships. That's how you grow. Otherwise, you just, you know, you're stuck in a bubble, right? So it's about kind of taking that step and accepting that, you know, and what I like to tell, you know, my clients is, you know, I don't want you to feel good. You know, when you come, I want you to have, you know, healthy negative emotions, because it's okay just to move forward, because you'll eventually get to good, right? But don't expect to feel good about things that make you feel bad, because that's not going to happen.
Yes, I think that's a great point that you're mentioning, that of it's important to have let's say, healthy relations with your difficult emotions. I think that's really important, because we're like, unpleasant emotions shouldn't be there, you know, so we detach. So that's definitely really important. That's a good point, that people need to know that all emotions are useful. They all serve a purpose. And it's, you know, sometimes I won't feel good. Sometimes I'll feel afraid. Sometimes I will feel sad, you know. Sometimes I will have the doubt, you know, and it's okay. I guess it's about how you deal with them, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's also about accepting that, like, I tell, like, for example, like this demand that I shouldn't have these bad emotions, you know. So I go back to the CBT model. You know, does that thinking help you? Not as a right or wrong, because you're right. You know why? You know, but it doesn't help you, because it's, you know, it causes kind of, being angry that you're angry or anxious that you're, it just explodes it, right? Who says that you shouldn't have negative emotions? 1 in 4 people in the world have mental health issues. Right now, it's 1 out of 2 because of Corona. Why shouldn't you?
Yes,
Right?
exactly.
So there's a beautiful anecdote, and I wish I could tell you it was mine, but it's not. But one of my patients told me this, that they read in a book that the author told the reader to think of their bad emotions like a bad roommate.
Mm-hmm.
Right? He doesn't flush the toilet, his clothes are everywhere, there's food all over the kitchen wall, but if you fight with him, he throws you on the street and you're homeless. You have no money for rent. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
accepting these are negative emotions, okay, but I need to persist with them, otherwise what's coming is going to be worse.
Exactly.
So, and then you kind of, because the more demand you have that you don't have them, the more you amplify them, and this is your responsibility.
Yes, that's a great analogy. Definitely, that's a great analogy. To know what's out there, I guess, to know your options, and I guess life is full of challenges, and challenges are opportunities. Sometimes they're very difficult, sometimes extremely difficult to actually look at it that way, right? Because sometimes you just don't want that. And it can be quite understandable. But in the absolute is, yes, every challenge is an opportunity for self-growth, and yes, everybody has a different challenge that way. I guess one of the aspects of the ego, the ego self, is to never actually be in the present, right? It's always looking for something. It's always like engaged in some kind of a fight. That means what I have, what I don't have, what I should, what I shouldn't have, and all of these kind of dialogues. So it's never like fully now in the present. I guess that's really something that a lot of people will be struggling with, right? And that's basically why they're going to have anxieties, and why they might have even, to some extent have be depressed, is simply because they're always completely like in a state where their ego is they're completely in an ego state, let's say, so basically they're never fully kind of in the present. They're always asking things that isn't in their control, because the ego always needs that sense of control, right?
Maybe people who get anxious try to change a future event that hasn't happened yet, right?
Yes.
People get depressed, try to change a past event. Neither is possible. Yes. All you can focus on now is how, what can I do about now? So and this, it becomes a challenge. I mean, it seems kind of, very common sense, but when the person's in the middle of it, in the throes of it, they need somebody to kind of just step in. And I remember this one. I won't mention which country, but there's a country in the region where I was visiting in the late '90s, and I heard this commotion inside the store, and I walk in, and this father was just really beating his son, like not hitting, he was beating him, and I interfered. And the thing is, I went in and I thought I'd get a fight from the father, but in fact, I put my hand on his shoulders, and he moved me. I didn't move him. It was because he was stuck in this kind of, in this thing. And so it was interesting. It's like sometimes people just need, a touch on the shoulder. I mean, figuratively, not literally, but just
literally, yeah.
Just kind of go like that, and then they, for some people it's much more difficult than that. But
yes.
Sometimes I've seen too often that it's lifestyle choices that lead to these issues, like, not sleeping enough, for example, or not eating properly, or, and it's like you get these, and some people don't kind of, I mean, maybe for us, as trained professionals, we understand that it's a bi-directional thing. Yes, if you have, depression or anxiety, it can lead to kind of some symptoms. But if you kind of mimic those symptoms, so I don't eat enough, I don't take care of my sleep. Like, for example, like Ramadan for me, and the month after Ramadan, most of my anxiety and panic attack patients come then. The problem is not Ramadan. People have done Ramadan for centuries. The problem is the culture in Kuwait interprets Ramadan. It's like Ramadan, oh, I'm going to be up all night. Okay, 1 year, 2 years, but eventually your brain is going to make you pay, And so it's like lifestyle choices that can go a long way towards, and again, that's part of going back to ego. It's part of like fusing with culture. The culture's that way. I want to become part of it, but becoming part, I lose a sense of myself and lose kind of other things there.
Yes, of course. I get lost in that spiral. Yes, depending on where we're from.
Yeah,
for sure. Yes, and that's a really good point too about lifestyle. The impact of whether we're tired or not, how that's going to impact our thinking, and obviously whether or not we'll fall prey of, let's say, maybe prey is not the right word, but fall into some kind of a victim mentality that's always about what I have, what I don't have, and then it's more vulnerable to it simply because I'm physiologically tired. Also, it can just be as simple as that, right? that I can have that bad day in which I'm like completely taken by my ego, in a negative sense, as opposed to the usual. Right. So there's these different components as well. It's like a day by day basis. Some days I feel good, and some days I don't, and some periods I don't, and as you said, in times of like Ramadan for you, that's where you see a lot of people who come to see you, for issues that throughout the rest of the year they don't have, and as a result of their conception, and as you said, and perhaps also because of their lifestyle that's completely changed in that during that specific time of the year. Mm.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Good.
Yeah. Yeah. So in terms of like working on one's ego in a way where we can be a little bit more in the present. So for people who are struggling, basically either because of like the COVID fears, because of maybe other fears, other stresses that's causing them to be depressed or other things, what would be like your recommendation there to be a little, perhaps a little bit more in the present?
What I tell people is this, like, I have people, for example, who are, that have a death phobia. And I tell them, if being scared of death is going to help you live longer, knock yourself out.
Mm-hmm.
The reality is, the more afraid you are of death, the more likely you're going to die sooner because of the stress. So it's just, the kind of the underlying thing there is, it's focus on things that are under your control.
Yes.
Do what you can. And the rest, leave it to fate, leave it to God, leave it to however you kind of conceive the world.
Mm-hmm.
But you're not fate, you're not God, right? So in the end of the day, kind of knowing, here are the things that I can do.
Yes.
Take
Yeah.
vaccination, wear my mask, wear my gloves, social distance, do what you and the rest. What's going to happen is going to happen. But the more you fret about what might happen, the more likely. It's like the person who's paranoid. Right?
Yes.
He's always the one that ends up, getting somebody lying to him or stealing from them because they're so over focused they don't see when it happens.
Yes. So true. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
Right. It's because that mindset that you're in basically affects the way that you feel, and then it affects your actions, your choices. That means your decision making. And then you feel bad, and basically that's that cycle. But that self-fulfilling prophecy works both ways, right? So I can also just focus my mind on what I do control, meaning that I have a power of choice, at least a choice in the direction of what I choose to attend to, right? And the decision that I will take from there will then kind of lead me to feel differently, like the examples that you gave. In the same way, I can choose to, I'll choose to focus my mind on things I'm grateful for every day, and I could focus on maybe let me practice some meditation or learn what mindfulness practice is, or let's say a breathing exercise, or it could be like a Pilates kind of practice that I do in my own house, for example, can also affect the way that I feel as well. Right?
For sure.
Yeah.
So I mean, the more you feel less negative, I want to say, not positive, but the more positive your day is going to be. Because the thing is, we know our mood is going to dictate what we pay attention to, right? So if we pay attention to more negative things, we're feeling negative. We're going to look at the bad things in our partner, in our friend, in our, so it's a feedback loop that's huge. It's not as simple as, it's not as simple as kind of like, so having it's okay to have a bad day. It's okay to recognize. It's okay to talk about it.
Yes.
Bad day.
Totally. Absolutely. I mean, we're not perfect machines, so we're going to experience life in its diversity, and we're constantly on a daily basis, we're challenged with new information. We're constantly challenged with new information. So it's okay not to have a good day, and it's okay to, but the most important is not to get stuck in that. I think that makes a difference between, like you said, like earlier, like a trained professional, people who are really mindful of this, who work in the field all the time, and someone who isn't, and people who get caught up, and then who eventually they seek some form of help, whether through us therapists, or through other mediums, that of self discovery. Right? There's a lot of good self-help books out there, and there's a lot of different practices that I know a lot of people who haven't seen therapists. It's not necessarily a must that you see a therapist. Some people
What's wrong with
Yeah,
it?
what's wrong? What's wrong? They have to find it. Yeah, exactly. All right. Okay. So yeah. So any last words you'd like to say about this topic?
I mean, I think it's very very important to kind of whether it's self help or like if you're in a relationship where you feel like your ego, where you're being used as an extension of somebody else, so it's not about you, it's about them and their needs, not about your needs. Then there are lots of books out there, whether it's about narcissistic parents or partners, or if you feel like they're using you, or if you feel like you need them to use you. There's books on codependency. So I think the ego is very important to kind of understand yourself, and that doesn't mean you necessarily have to change, right? But at least to understand where those psychological pain points are coming from. Why do you feel used? Why do you feel why do you feel like you need somebody versus wanting somebody? I think it's very important to understand yourself, and then if you want to change, you find somebody who can help you change. But if you don't, that's okay. But at least understand yourself.
Understand yourself, because a lot of the time we kind of take things personally.
Yeah.
That falls also under the umbrella, right? It's like you take something personal and you always feel maybe it's your fault or something like that. So yeah, thank you very much, Naif, for today. It's really nice having you and having this chat, and I hope I'm going to be seeing you physically soon. It's been a long time, right?
Take care.
All right, so take good care. Okay, bye everyone. So this is the end of today's talk, and I'll be seeing you again next Wednesday. Actually, I have something planned for next Wednesday, and also it'll be on a different topic. So any questions you have, just send them across. Hopefully, what we talked about today was informative to you, or at least it just confirmed what you might already know about the ego. The ego isn't a bad thing, and it's just about balance and learning to live and recognize and understand your ego, understand yourself, and find ways to be a little bit more in the present without being a victim, let's say, of your ego self. All right. So hope you all stay safe and well wherever you are, and I'll be speaking again to you soon. All right. Take good care, everybody. Bye for now. Bye. Bye for now.